On today's episode, we're talking about how much you should spend on business development. Almost every founder asks us some version of this, and the first answer is always the same. It depends on your gross margins, but that's the easy half. The harder question is where the money goes once you have it, because the 5 functions of biz dev don't cost the same and don't pay back the same. We'll walk through all 5 and how much each one is worth funding.
All right, so really this question of how much should we spend on agency biz dev is actually 2 questions hiding inside one. So when an agency founder asks like, hey, how much should I spend? It's actually not a single number we're talking about. It's more about like, hey, how big should the budget be and where specifically within biz dev should it go? So obviously the first part, the budget question, it's all driven by gross margin. Right, we did this whole episode on it, episode 27. So maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about gross margin as a refresher. But beyond that, like it's the allocation part that I think is really important and what we'll spend most of today talking about. Where does within biz dev does the money go? Where does it get wasted a lot? Where can you get kind of your good bang for your buck? And one way to talk about this is like, are founders putting dollars, into something that's like super expensive, like just being inefficient with their spend versus, where can they be more efficient and effective with spend, maybe something lower cost spend on business development that can have a high impact.
Yeah. And we'll get deeper into the different ones, but an expensive dollar for, as an example, could be outbound or really something cold from scratch where you're hiring a new person or hiring an outbound shop versus a lower cost option is growing the clients you already have. But, founders do, when they ask us, what is a budget, they often just want a percentage. Like, all right, should I do 10% of revenue? Like, is that a right number? But it's not, oftentimes it's not about the number, right? It's really skipping the real decision on what needs to happen. It's, 2 agencies could spend the same amount, like 15% on biz dev, and they can get completely different results because if one agency invests in growing accounts and the other one is all on an outbound agency, they can have varying results, and the mix on how they spend the money really matters more than that specific percentage.
Yeah, so let's dive in. I mean, maybe we could talk about, I mentioned gross margin previously, so let's dive into what that concept is as a refresher.
So when we think about how much money you have for business development, gross margin, gross profit is really the funding source for everything. So if you have a high gross margin, you have room to invest without, eating all the profit and you're left with nothing at the end. We talked about this in episode 27, where as rough guidelines, agencies should target 50+% gross margin, and let's say 15 to 20% goes to sales and marketing, 5 to 10 goes to G&A. You still land with around 20 to 30% EBITDA, and that's a pretty healthy place to be.
Yeah, and I think one way to think about this is like, good margins buy you the room, right, to invest in growth while still keeping profit at the end of the year. But as we well know from experience, like if your gross margin is under 40%, you're basically out of runway, because once you pay for delivery and then SG&A on top of that, it's really tough to kind of squeeze, margin unless you decide to forego paying yourself as well. And so, it definitely, this kind of statement a lot of agency founders make of like, hey, we had a down year because we invested in growth. We take that with a grain of salt. There's a bit of like a myth behind it where it's like, you know what, 9 times out of 10, your gross margins probably slipped. And as a result, you had to, kind of eat into the profits, when you invested in growth. And even then it's likely that you didn't invest as much as you wanted into growth.
Yeah. And we'll come back to this. But margin doesn't set how much you can spend. It really defines like, what can you actually afford to do as an agency? And it all starts with gross margin.
All right. Before we dive into each of the functions, the 5 biz dev functions, I think one thing that we'll talk about here is that like each, biz dev function buys you revenue basically, right? It delivers growth, but at very different cost structures, or you could say prices, right? And a couple things vary, right? First, like what it costs to make a dollar, and the second part is the time. How long does it take for that dollar to show up, right? So if you kind of think about you know marketing, 101, it's like you spend X dollars on ads or something like that, and then you kind of get like some kind of a return on ad spend, right? This is like the agency part of it, but then like we don't have as clear of a transactional measure on things in terms of like exactly tracking ads to clicks to buys, but you can kind of think about it in a much larger picture, and from there, like we really do think that account growth, which we'll get into, is wins on both accounts because it is low cost and the results come pretty quick. And then we'll get to this at the end. Is like outbound, we think, is something that will typically loses for a lot of agencies because they're it's expensive and slow. But through that lens, we're going to walk through, and of course, there's some caveats that we'll talk about. It's not a blanket all kind of a thing for every single agency, but this is all kind of mirrors a lot of the things that we talked about in episode 32 about scaling business development beyond the founder. And so the 5 functions are going to be marketing, partnerships, outbound, sales, and account growth. And yeah, let's dive in and start with what we're going to talk about.
Great. So the first function is account growth. So this is what we are saying is the lowest cost dollar. And really, this is about expanding your existing engagements with your existing clients through, you might have more projects, you might expand, add on your scope, or you might have a retainer to add on to your initial engagement. And really, this is, the lowest cost, but in highest margin dollar in business development. And really, we consider like the lowest hanging fruit here. I think founders and teams often underinvest in this the most. But there's, really a playbook for how to make this a more impactful part of your new biz efforts.
Yeah, I mean, so one inspiration that we pull from is obviously, David Meister, who wrote Managing the Professional Service Firm, right? It's a book that we reference a lot, just over the years. And he has a whole section on like, why it's so important to market to existing clients. And it's really about account growth. And, there's really the 4 reasons why this is so important. The number one is, hey, existing clients are definitely higher probability prospects, right? They already know and trust you. And then number 2, the marketing cost to win them is lower, right? Because they're not like a cold, contact, and you already, you don't have to have this long running courtship to win that relationship. The third part is like, a lot of times the follow-on work with these clients is more profitable than the first one because you already know how to work with them. You kind of have a good process going. And then lastly, as you work more with the same client, and you kind of develop like process and everything, like you can get more efficient with the delivery. And it might be you could even kind of put in some other personnel, lower cost personnel, or these days you could put automations and AI in place, which is going to raise your leverage and then also increase your margins.
Yeah. Mixer also kind of talks about like, you got to be disciplined about this because it's not trying to win anything from anyone. So like any of your clients, it's really targeting the accounts where a couple things are true. So the first thing is there's real like additional need that you can serve and you can actually, provide more value. And then also the relationship has to be strong enough so that any effort that you're putting into growing that account actually pays off and you can actually convert from it.
Yeah, and so I think the cool thing about this in the book, and everyone should grab a copy if you haven't checked it out, but he actually lists a lot of like stuff, like tactical stuff, and one of the things that he suggests is like, hey, maybe you spend a little bit of your new business budget inside your current engagement. Just go the extra mile, maybe offer an extra analysis, or maybe make the turnaround a little bit faster. So this is where, and this is interesting. It's a little bit tricky because you have to be very disciplined in this as well. You are in effect sacrificing a little bit of gross margin, but then you're saying that delivery cost is actually a marketing investment for your client. So going above and beyond, for that client, as a way to, just kind of build that relationship and grow that account. So, just think about that as an interesting mental model for how marketing, dollars or kind of account growth dollars could be spent.
Yeah. And this is an area where, agencies typically underinvest. And some of the reasons it's, there's no like, it's like unglamorous, right? It's like the thing where like you're servicing your existing clients. There's no like cool new logo. Like there's no big announcement that can say like, hey, we won, um, a new account. And usually there's no owner around it. So it's just something that kind of sits with nobody. But it's yeah, so it's like it's either somewhere between like delivery and sales, right? And without that owner, you end up with something that gets underinvested. And so it's almost like a comp thing, right? If you have account managers who are comped, purely on keeping clients happy, then that's going to be their job. They're going to keep the clients happy, but not think about growth. But if you can, imagine some variable comp where account growth is what these account managers are incentivized on, maybe their behavior will change, and then you can actually see some expansion, and that will move the needle for the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. And so like to bring this back to kind of like, all right, your agency founder trying to figure out how to spend on business development. And we say, hey, account growth is an excellent place to start, right? Just it's low hanging fruit. You're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. So I think the activities where the dollars can actually go is, some of the stuff that Maester said, maybe going the extra mile on engagements, but it's other stuff too, like maybe it's just on the account management front, having really good QBRs, right, where you're kind of showcasing the stuff that you did for the client, the results that you were able to deliver, and then talking about the future, kind of mapping what future engagements could be, also different expansion paths that you could kind of think about within that client, maybe some of this training stuff that you could give as well, but yeah, it's very low lift. Like you don't need to bring on a bunch of new resources to do this stuff. And so, yeah, if you do this right, think about all the ways that you could go get deeper with your existing clients. This is, of course, an excellent place to start.
Let's move on to the next function, which is partnerships and referrals. Again, something that is lower cost but slow to build. For this, we're talking about building relationships with other companies in your ecosystem who could refer you business. This could be other agencies with supplemental services. This could be tech partners or industry organizations, like other people that exist that you probably have a relationship with now, but being intentional about it, and having that be a meaningful part of your biz dev efforts.
Yeah, and I think these have generally like a lower direct cost, right? Like it's yeah, in many respects, it's like it's somebody's time plus maybe a little co-marketing budget at the most basic level, right? And it's more about yeah, like building that high trust, right? Investing in that high trust because at the end, like that warm intro you get from somebody, can go much further and convert a lot at a higher rate than something that is a cold lead. And so, yeah, I think while it's relatively lower cost, it does take a lot of discipline and a system. And we talked about a lot about this in a couple of episodes. I think episode 12 we did a whole thing on like lightweight partnerships programs, and then episode 18 we talked about like treating referrals as a system. And so yeah, with that, like the hard work here is not so much like the dollar investment, but it's about like building that system, so that you're not just operating off of, hey, like we have a great partnership vibe, but it's like more about can you identify the right partners, can you have a real give and take going, and can you follow up consistently.
Yeah, and we've seen this all the time where you see founders who, have great relationships, go to all these like dinners and like meet a ton of people, and they're visible, but there's no real, cadence of following up. There's no system that actually turns all those conversations and relationships into actual pipeline. And we've been guilty of this. We've gone to like all
Too
these
much.
events, and we've kind of let things,
Yeah.
fizzle from there. But really, the fix here is like giving this function a real owner. And a couple of our Barrel Holdings agencies have brought on dedicated people, partnership managers, who kind of know everyone in that ecosystem And they're actually incentivized based on partnership driven revenue. So, now there's a person who's actually working on co-marketing, actually checking in and bringing, leads back to the team and knowledge from all these partners back to the team. So it's a very structured, intentional process.
Yeah. So just kind of like if we break down what the actual spend might be on on this particular biz dev function, right? It might be somebody who's going to own partnerships outside the founder, right? So this might be somebody even part-time, working part-time. And then on top of that like a co-marketing budget to start. So, it could be someone you're paying a few $1,000 a month and then to do a part time, and then maybe a couple thousand a quarter to do different co-marketing activities. And then of course, as you see success with this and you want to like invest further, you could build, you could scale this up, and you could build a partnerships team, right? And you can really blow out that budget to be 5-6 figures a quarter. Who knows, right? But then one thing we'd add is like certain ecosystems that you might be part of have partners who are more than willing to, they might be well-funded, VC backed type, high growth companies that are more than happy to foot the co-marketing, costs of like, maybe if you're doing a private dinner or like some kind of event, they're more than happy to pay for that as long as, you play your part in showing up, maybe helping with the programming and definitely bringing different prospects to that event. So yeah, this is all about like so much opportunity. It takes time though. So, get to this early, give it the time, and then make sure, you bring patience as you invest.
Great. So the next function is marketing and awareness. So we'll call this a medium cost and slow payback. And marketing, obviously, is about getting in front of your ICP and doing activities to grab their attention, stay top of mind, and make them think about you, when the time is right, and just reminding them that you exist. And really, the goal is for this marketing activity to spur them into taking action when the time is right and reaching out to you, engaging in a sales conversation that could lead to new business.
Yeah. And, marketing is generally the slowest to pay back in this sense. Like, so the marketing that we're talking about here, which is why founders often feel it's the first thing to cut, when things, and maybe like their gross margin suffers and they're like, oh no, I gotta like reduce costs. And, it's like marketing is the first thing that usually gets removed. I mean, how many times have we heard of founders, laying off their, marketing, personnel off their team because the moment things get a little tight, right? But here's the other, thing to realize is that, marketing done well, it's actually the investment, it's the dollar that makes all the other, biz dev investments cheaper, right? It's it's about like it makes the inbound warmer, it makes the referrals easier, it helps the outbound be more effective because this is all about raising the awareness of your brand as an agency, getting your name out there, and like you mentioned before, like being top of mind to potential prospects.
Yeah, and this is something we see happen a lot when founders haven't spent the time to build out this function. So it's usually the founders that are doing the marketing themselves, and they do it like here and there. Like when they have a free week, they'll like do a lot of marketing activity, and then they'll go silent, and then they get busy and stay quiet for a couple months, and then it's really inconsistent, right? It's and we've done this too when we haven't really thought about the systems around it. And really, if you think about marketing, if you do this for your clients, it's all about consistency. Like, what are the things that you continually do to stay top of mind? And these, stop and start, activities, don't lend itself well to having a strong function.
And I think one way to kind of think about this as a mental model is like, marketing, this type of marketing, there's really like what we call like a habits layer, right? Where, you're trying to be consistent with certain things like, creating case studies, posting on social, sending newsletters to your list and those kinds of things. So, that like just goes on in the background, like build a system so you don't even have to think about it. It just happens, right? And then there's like the more experimental part of marketing, right? Where, you're doing campaigns, one-off ideas. You're trying to get, maybe pitch a story that could show up on in an earned media capacity, hosting some kind of cool event, or just doing something different to stand out. And and then using those signals to then like continue to do more experiments. And a lot of them are going to fail, but then every now and then like you might have some marketing experiment that really takes off and just gives you a lot of attention. And so you want to combo those things of like habits and experiments, because those things play with each other.
Yeah. Another aspect of all of this is, AI search and just being visible, and the discoverability there is obviously very important. And I think the more inputs you give it, so all these ongoing habits and all the experiments helps AI have information it can use to generate its answers. So if if all the activities can result in, like top 10 lists, or if you're mentioned in industry publications, or if your own website, you have, landing pages and case studies and more accurate information on who you are and who you serve, all these things can contribute positively to SEO or AI search that, can bring you leads ultimately.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to like, yeah, what is the investment on the marketing side? Obviously it could be, yeah, it's building that system. Part of that is, maybe you have personnel. It could start with the founder being very disciplined and allocating their own time, but then, it's bringing other folks who can help kind of create some of these assets that, can feed on the content side. It could be bringing someone else to coordinate events and other activities, campaigns, and things like that as well. So, I think once you kind of understand that, hey, this is a long-term investment, you start to realize, all right, whether it's in a part-time capacity or you're building a full-on marketing team, there's a lot you can do in between that, and kind of see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think this is the one we talked about timing before, but yeah, different marketing efforts can take a varying amount of time to pay off. So, like, let's say you have a webinar as part of your marketing activity, like you could immediately get someone reaching out right after it, and that could lead to an opportunity. Or you might have a private dinner and you meet a bunch of people, and a prospect you meet there could be ready to purchase years down the line, right? So it's one of those things where you have to put in the effort, be consistent, but the payoff could come at a much later date.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll leave it with this, like marketing really like greases the wheels for all the other biz dev activities. That's kind of the important takeaway for this.
All right. So the next function is sales, which is the conversion layer. So it's really, sales is about taking the opportunities that you've generated through all the different activities that come through your funnel, and then converting them into, deals that you close.
Yeah. And, I think, sales often it's like, hey, if revenue isn't growing, people are like, oh, I need to invest more in sales. And, you know, one way to think about it, maybe it's just, terminology kind of thing. But, the way we think about it in this context with the way we've thought about business development, yeah, like sales isn't really like a, can we buy more dollars kind of function. It's more about, yeah, converting the demand that the other four functions create. So, you really are talking about not the volume of opportunities, but it's about conversion and the capacity to convert. And so think about it as like, spending big on sales, especially when your top of funnel is weak, is very wasteful. So you're in many respects you've hired this closer who has nothing to close.
Yeah, and we find this is also one of the hardest functions that um, founders have to hand off. So, if you think about sales as at an agency, it's a lot about like trust building with key stakeholders, and talking about your experience. And it's usually the founder that's the best at doing it. They have all the rep and all the credibility from doing the work over the years. So handing over that function feels riskier than handing over the other ones that we described. And really, it isn't to just step away cold. It's to build the systems and transfer the trust to another person or a team of people over time.
Yeah. And I say like if you're in a position to really invest in sales, that's a good place to be, because that means like, you have all these leads and you're like, oh, I'm at capacity. Like we can't like we have so much momentum on the, demand side, but we just have limited capacity to convert it. Great. Then, it's the right time to really spend, maybe it is, bringing on another account exec or somebody who can, do the closing alongside you as a founder. Maybe, maybe just it's cleaning up the CRM, having better stuff there, proposal support, just making sure you're getting those proposals out in an efficient way. Maybe it's also scoping help, getting better, whether it's solutions architect, strategist, whoever might be involved in that. And then, yeah, it's about kind of building the systems so that, like, beyond the founder, you have this kind of trust transfer that can happen so that, yeah, eventually the founder can step out of the sales process entirely and, depend on this team to take it through.
Yeah, and I think the important thing here is, you have to have the demand, all the other activities. You have to have the leads to convert. So, be cautious about scaling all that your spend on sales and building all these systems before you have the demand to actually convert. So you have to match it with the pipeline that you have.
Awesome. Okay. The last one, outbound, right? So we're calling this the most expensive dollar, right? And I mean, outbound, we all know what it is. It's when the agency is looking to generate opportunities by targeting potential prospects, and usually done through cold channels, cold email, cold calling, LinkedIn messages. And we say this is expensive because it also slowest because you're talking about high cost per meeting, very low conversions. And what do we typically hear? It's like, hey, pipeline is weak. Let's go hire an outbound shop, right? And we've kind of talked about this in the past of like how this is kind of a misconception. And I think it goes back to like people really skip what's important, right? Outbound really only works if you have great positioning, you have proof, you have a real offer. And without those, obviously the message is going to be generic and just not going to land. And so this goes back to something that we've harped on many times, which is like you need a strong foundation, right? You need to have that, that positioning dialed in, ICP, service offering, understand what ecosystems you play in, and only then does it really make sense.
Yeah, and this is what we see this all the time with outbound, where it feels like if you hire someone, it's like you set them up to fail. If you get outbound in place, but you don't have positioning done. So you might hire an agency, give them like a 3-month contract, and then they'll have no meetings or, no actual, and nothing closed. And you'll say, you know what, outbound doesn't work for us. And then you'll give up and never do it again and put it off for years. But, if you take a step back, like outbound was never the problem. It's you taking this channel and you didn't have the foundation that was ready to have a clear messaging that you're sending out to an audience, or you probably didn't even know who you were targeting. So it's really outbound has to be a supplement to an engine that is already running, a foundation that's strong, and not just the engine itself.
Yeah. And so, yeah, if you're thinking about kind of where the spend is with outbound, so so when you're ready for it and, you've kind of checked all the other boxes, then, it's about like spending time on kind of like, RevOps or, go-to-market engineering type of things, maybe getting some kind of software where you're getting better segmentation and better kind of enriching type of stuff like Clay. You're building really strong lists, the deliverability, sending infrastructure is all set. And then you get actual people to run this stuff, whether that's internally or through an outsourced agency. And yeah, this is definitely the last dollar we think that you should fund in most cases. And, this is where, some of the lower cost functions are, hitting their marks. And then you're finally, you have that engine humming where you can then layer on outbound.
Yeah. And so the one caveat here is there are certain types of agencies. Let's say if you sell truly productized or one-off services where, account growth isn't part of your business model. And it's really about selling these engagements and getting new logos. And you have a really easy to buy offer. Outbound could be a primary driver of your biz dev or a main part. And account growth really isn't part of the story. And for those, it's again, like positioning is important. Knowing that is, your business strategy is important, and not kind of making excuses and saying, hey, we only sell one off, but we didn't really think about how we could do account growth. So just making sure that this is the type of agency you are, and investing in outbound.
Yeah.
For that. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, cool. So, all right, we just went through all the different functions, and then now let's put it all together again. Okay, so just to recap it, like there's really two rules that we think to this question of like how should I spend on biz dev. The first is like gross margin really sets the ceiling, right? And that's kind of without that, this really makes sense. And then the cost and payback of these kind of biz dev functions, usually set the order. And so you really want to fund from, the lowest cost, biz dev functions to the most expensive and slowest. And so, our kind of recommendation is start with account growth, then partnerships and referrals, marketing, sales capacity, and then outbound. And then, one of the things that you want to kind of avoid is when like a lot of founders who ignore account growth. Make sure you have somebody to own that, and new logos aren't the only thing to drive new business success. Business development happens with existing clients. Make sure marketing is funded well, even though the payoff is slow. Remember, it's greasing the wheels of the other functions. And then like make sure to avoid overfunding outbound. I mean, it feels like it should work because like you're hitting new contacts and you're getting new leads. But like I said, it's a costly mistake that a lot of folks make. And so make sure you kind of think about the order in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. And again, on the point of gross margins, really gross margins it defines like what you can afford as a business. If you're under 40% gross margin, like realistically, you may only be able to afford the things that are the lowest cost, things like account growth, partnerships, and there may not be room in your budget for the things that are slower or expensive, like doing an experiment with marketing or bring on an outbound team. If you have outbound or your outbound isn't working and your margins are thin, outbound may not be your problem. It's your margin. So it's really thinking upstream, like really understanding like what is your pricing, specialization, do you have scoping discipline, like the fundamentals of the business. Having that dialed in first allows you the flexibility and the room to invest in business development.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let's like close this out. I think there's a good homework exercise that we recommend, right? I think if you go and pull your last 12 months of BD spend, just kind of go through it. Not just the dollar amounts that you can kind of see in a line item through expenses, but like how much time did you as a founder or your different team members spend on any kind of BD related activities? And think about it, bucket across all the 5 functions that we talked about, and what was the percentage that went to each, and just be like, how much did you actually spend in kind of account growth? How much did you actually spend in partnerships? And then how much did actually go into outbound? So just kind of map all those things out, and then from there you can kind of see where you're at, and then kind of think about the orders that we suggested, and see like what changes that need to be made. And of course, one more plug on our foundation app, which foundation.agencyhabits.com. Go and test your current positioning. It'll definitely give you some insights of where you're at with your positioning and where there could be opportunities to improve. So thanks for joining us. Till next time, take care.